Yeah. Listen, I know change can be hard. Our brains are literally wired that way. Change is always registered as pain, whether it's positive or negative. Apparently, this is because it's our brain's way of entering a fight or flight mode to protect us. That's why, even when it's toxic for you, we really just stick to our routines. Some people stay in their echo chambers, and a lot of people remain skeptical even with definitive proof in front of their very eyes. But oftentimes, isn't that kind of just harmful to us? Yeah, I mean, it kind of is. That's why, historically, it's much harder to keep up with science. It's a lot harder to adapt your thinking based on new facts. Yeah, it's much harder to be, well, progressive.
Don't say the word.
I said the word. Everyone's gonna come for me in the comments now.
They're gonna beat your ass in the quote retweets.
Meanwhile, conservatism, prejudice, and even religion just keep surviving.
Damn it, Johnny. Now there you go, just pushing everyone's buttons again.
Many words.
As humans, we want answers as soon as we can get them, and typically the first things we hear tend to stick. Anything that contradicts them in the long run will be damned, no matter how convincing. If you're raised on a specific set of foundations for your life, just imagine how painful it is for your brain to have to knock those pillars down. How much of your life and belief systems just have to come crashing. The amount of ways our lives are affected by this silly cerebral quirk are too many to list in one sitting. But did you know an activity that you and I do every day was once considered a little too, I don't know.
A new study by Montreal researchers about action video games indicates that habitual players may be more at risk for developing certain brain diseases.
Psychologists say can lead to extreme introversion. Youngsters communicating in a video fantasy land.
Sounds like a pretty thrilling game, and this is the kind of violence that critics are pretty worried about.
The bottom line, parents wonder if kids can separate fantasy from the real thing.
Video games are the most profitable form of media we have, profiting more than movies and music combined, according to the FTC. Yet, have you noticed that it's still the most stigmatized medium? I mean, really, how many times have you heard Granny tell you that those good-for-nothing video games are gonna rot your brain? Or that using controllers will give you arthritis? Or that it's just a waste of time compared to other things you could be doing? Yeah, Granny, sorry I'm not like knitting or something, whatever. Even younger generations place a stigma on gaming, oddly enough. Even though approximately 74% of households in the United States have at least one gamer, there's still this weird, unspoken rule that video games are an immature form of entertainment. Or at least there's a rule that we should feel this way. Even though, like I said, most of us are gamers, to some capacity. Yeah, I guess that makes us gluttons for punishment or something. But I digress. Today, you're gonna all leave well informed. Rest assured, video games are not an immature medium of entertainment. They're actually really good for you, especially depending on what kind of games you play. So let's dive into all the reasons video games are one of the most educational forms of media around. Alright, we'll start with the obvious. Video games, by nature, are the most complex entertainment we have. They're not only the most interactive, but they also incorporate aspects of every other medium humans have crafted. In a video game, you're reading a book, watching a movie, gathering information, and performing educated actions based on all of that. Sometimes, all of this is literally happening at the same time. This not only keeps your mind flexible, but actively trains all kinds of coordination skills in the player, such as hand-eye and multitasking. Let's get into more specific claims to fame though. How many of you have learned new things from video games? This could literally be something as simple as an unfamiliar word. Like with me in Pokemon, I can't tell you how many words I've learned just from playing these games. And I've even figured out what they mean based on context clues, so I'm just really freaking smart. Okay, so like here's an example. The word fatigue. I had no idea what it meant before playing Pokemon, but every time my Gyarados used the move Thrash, he'd become, quote, confused from fatigue. Okay, so as a kid, I didn't know what Thrash meant, or what fatigue meant. All I knew is that when Gyarados used Thrash, this frenzy of attacks would happen all over the enemy's portrait, so I assumed Thrash meant he was just rampaging like crazy. And then for the word fatigue, I knew it's what caused him to become confused after using Thrash because the game said so. And because when a Pokemon is confused, a bunch of ducks circled their head and there was a chance they would hurt themselves, I figured fatigue was the sensation of Gyarados tiring itself out from all the movement, leading to the confusion status where he could accidentally hurt himself trying to hit the opponent. Needless to say, I was right. There are countless other words and examples I have like this from Pokemon. Words like nostalgia, endeavor, bide, sheer, aerial, aromatherapy, facade, yeah, basically my entire vocabulary. But they were foreign to me before playing this video game. Vocabulary is a basic skill that games, even outside of Pokemon, can help children learn. It was one of my biggest educators growing up, but that didn't stop at words. Let's think now about RPGs. They're an especially potent source of learning mathematical concepts like numbers, probability, percentages, and formulas. Okay, another great example I have. My friend Kayla's Capsule works in the data department of her job, and I you not. When no one else could figure out how to calculate an important projection they needed that accounted for multiple variables, Kayla used the differential equation used for catching Pokemon to figure it out for them. Needless to say, everyone at the office had their jaws drop when she said she learned it from a video game. Alright Kayla, we see you, making us all look really good as gamers. RPGs are also really good for learning chemistry concepts. Type advantages offer constant reminders of how different elements interact with each other, and almost every RPG has this mechanic. From simple things like water beats fire, fire beats nature, and so on, to more complex interactions. Like lightning and poison beating water, earth beats lightning, bug, poison, and wind beat nature, so on and so forth. In more extreme cases, a few modern adventure games even host an in-depth chemistry system. Like this one game I bet you've never heard of, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which mixes a complex physics system with its chemistry system to force you to use them in puzzle solving. Come on, we all know this is a major reason why we all love this game. Game economies can also give an early introduction to the world of money. Having to manage this precious resource can teach a child the fundamental values of when to save and when to spend. I know for a fact that I and all three of my sisters learned to be frugal from all the video games we've played. Some games even dive into more complicated economic concepts like markets, investments, mortgages, yeah, you get the point, such as Animal Crossing and The Sims. But I bet you only know what those words meant if you played those games. Everyone else watching is probably clueless. Money isn't always the only precious resource in games. Inventory management in general is a gaming staple that can teach a player not to be careless with their assets. The most extreme cases of this are survival games. In a game like, Subnautica, you crash land in the middle of the water on a foreign planet with no tutorial on what to do. This forces the player to begin thinking on the spot from the very start. Like, when I tell you this was a brain exercise, I mean it. Right away you notice you have a hunger gauge, a thirst gauge, and a health bar. This immediately creates a sense of urgency, so you hop into the water. Things only get more intense though when you do, because now you see you have an oxygen gauge as well. Even further, nighttime does eventually arrive, and as you'd expect, since there's no lights on this foreign planet, all of your vision gets taken away and you're in the middle of the water. Talk about creepy. Although that does make this a great game for Halloween. So yeah, have fun with that. You're welcome for the recommendation. All these terrifying factors rear their heads so fast, yet you have to do something, and quick, or else you meet a swift end, because your hunger and thirst gauge are draining from the start. Be careful where you go though, because as you'd expect, there are alien sea creatures even more terrifying than the ones here on Earth. And they want nothing more than to make you their meal.
Dun, da-da! Ho, ho, ho!
Not only do you have to preserve your resources to survive in this game, but you also get to learn many other aspects of survival because you're experiencing it firsthand. Sure, Subnautica can be pretty outlandish with some futuristic sci-fi tech that we definitely wouldn't have in real life, but the basics are all still there. Hunting and curing food, purifying water, using resources to craft more complex contraptions, and so many other things you wouldn't have thought about before playing. But probably the most important way a game can educate you is actually with its narratives. There's been even more of an effort from developers to include stories and even side quests that give insight and allegory to real-world issues. Games like Final Fantasy show in detail the horrors of what we face every day through allegory. Horrors like the Big C, capitalism, wealth inequality, climate change, ecological destruction, disinformation, slavery, corrupt governments, nobility privilege, survivorship bias, psychopathy, and so much more are showcased heavily within these games. I could really just go on forever. Meanwhile, other games choose to beg existential questions, such as Nier Automata, which names many of its characters after famous philosophers. It uses its story and side quests to reference, quote, and sometimes even reenact concepts proposed by these historic figures. It really is the most profound game I've ever played. And then you have something like the Ace Attorney series, which does the impossible by blending the world of a high-end career that you need a graduate degree for with video games. And it does so flawlessly. Obviously, the general act of being an attorney gets simplified, but how many of us would have never gotten the chance to experience what it's like to be a main participant in the courtroom if it wasn't for these games? Ace Attorney shines a light on how riveting that experience can be while also teaching us a fair amount about investigations, debating, and law. Once you get to later games in the series, they even start introducing different judicial systems based on different countries. And of course, the narrative eventually evolves to emphasize important topics similar to the games I mentioned before, like Final Fantasy. Other times you have games like Temtem, which is very similar to Pokemon, but has more in-depth lore, including a major gameplay mechanic called the Freetem Society. It's basically a bunch of characters that are working to save Temtem from being used as, well, disposable slaves. And they incentivize you to release your Temtem into the wild so they can be free. The reasoning behind this is that civilization has evolved enough with technology so that there's no need to force Temtem to fight our battles. After all, digital Temtem exist in the lore of this world, which are just artificial versions of Temtem that you can do the same things with, but they aren't tortured creatures, because they're digital. And I mean, this can be compared to so many things. Obviously, slavery is one of them, war is another one, and then also just how we use animals as cattle and gruesomely slaughter them even though we've created alternative food options. Like, seriously, there's no need to be unethical towards animals anymore, especially since this is one of the leading causes of climate change, ecological destruction via grazing, and monetary waste, because meat is heavily subsidized by the government to be made artificially affordable. But you know what? Okay, I digress. Woo, moving past the previous loaded topics. Puzzles can come in many forms from game to game, but they all serve the same benefit: improving our critical thinking skills. The Legend of Zelda is a classic example of abstract puzzles being blended into an epic adventure. Like, they were honestly so clever, they reeled us in with the action, but then we stayed for the puzzles. And now that's like all we want. And if you're not a Zelda fan, or if it seems too kiddie for you, Tomb Raider follows a similar design philosophy. Some games focus on a specific kind of puzzle, and constantly evolve it in new and inventive ways to push the envelope as you progress. The Witness is a full-fledged adventure where the only puzzle you solve is drawing a continuous line from point A to point B. Yet it's become critically acclaimed for just how varied the developers evolved this one puzzle. Like, it's crazy. An even more famous example than The Witness is the cult classic Portal, where you really just have two abilities. You can create an entry portal, and you can create an exit portal. And you use these to get to the next elevator. That's literally it. But it's the way Portal throws new and inventive obstacles at you. It does such a good job of testing how deep this simple gameplay mechanic can become when you add in various factors, like gravity, mechanisms that require electrical currents, moving platforms, and even beams of death from some creepy-ass droids.
Critical error. Who's there? There you are.
Puzzle games, or games that mix puzzle solving into the core gameplay loop, are some of the most popular video games out there, and with good reason. That's because video games are almost always an exercise in problem solving, both micro and macro. Decisions to be made at every moment that constantly test your wit, reflexes, deductive skills, inventiveness, and adaptability. I mean, come on. Why do you think I'm so damn smart?
Executor, wow, it actually sits on you like perfectly.
Yeah,
That's really nice.
Togepi.
Not only can video games be educational, they can provide other benefits too.
One first saying that I'm sure you all have heard is the fact that too much screen time makes your eyesight worse. We actually know how to test that statement. We can step into the lab and measure how good your vision is. Well, guess what? People that don't play a lot of action games, that don't actually spend a lot of time in front of screens, have normal, or what we call corrected to normal vision. That's okay. The issue is what happens with these guys that actually indulge into playing video games like 5 hours per week, 10 hours per week, 15 hours per week. By that statement, their vision should be really bad, right? Guess what? Their vision is really, really good. It's better than those that don't play.
Okay, so this probably makes you ask the question, why? Why would our eyesight be better? Well,
they're actually able to resolve small detail in the context of clutter. Though that means being able to read the fine print on prescription rather than using magnifier glasses, you can actually do it with just your eyesight. The other way that they are better is actually being able to resolve different levels of gray. Imagine you're driving in the fog. That makes a difference between seeing the car in front of you and avoiding the accident or getting into an accident.
okay, so with this kind of revelation, what would the logical next step for a scientist such as this woman be?
So we're actually leveraging that work to develop games for patients with low vision and to have an impact on retraining their brain to see better.
That's right, you can actually use video games to train specific attributes of yourself. And scientists are becoming aware of this and are actually willing to use video games to help people. So, what other ways can they help us?
Another saying that I'm sure you have all heard around. Video games lead to attention problem and greater distractibility. Okay, we know how to measure attention in the lab. I'm going to show you colored words. I want you to shout out the color of the ink. Orange, good. Green, red, yellow, red, yellow, green. You got my point, right? You're getting better, but it's hard. Why is it hard? Because I introduced a conflict between the word itself and its color.
I think you can all guess where this is going.
How good your attention is determines actually how fast you resolve that conflict. With people that play a lot of action games, they actually resolve the conflict faster.
So even action games, not just like puzzle games or RPGs, can also help you develop your brain. And contrary to popular belief, it even helps improve your attention span.
Actually, those action video game players have many other advantages in terms of attention. And one aspect of attention which is also improved for the better is our ability to track objects around in the world. This is something we use all the time. When you're driving, you're keeping track of the cars around you. You're also keeping track of the pedestrian, the running dog, and that's how you can actually be safe driving.
So now we have attention span, the ability to discern minor differences in colors, and an improved ability to track objects subconsciously. This means video games actually help your safety in everyday life.
So your typical normal young adult can have a span of about 3 or 4 objects of attention. That's what we just did. Your action video game player has a span of about 6 to 7 objects of attention, which is what is shown in this video here.
Obviously, there are many tests to check the ways that video games affect our brains, but we can also see differences in the brain itself when comparing someone who plays video games to someone who doesn't.
But the main changes are actually to the brain networks that control attention. So one part is a parietal cortex, which is very well known to control the orientation of attention. The other one is the frontal lobe, which controls how we sustain attention. And another one is the anterior cingulate, which controls how we allocate and regulate attention and resolve conflict. Now, when we do brain imaging, we find that all 3 of these networks are actually much more efficient in people that play action games.
This increase in brain power also leads to better coordination and multitasking.
We can measure to the millisecond accuracy how good they are at switching from one task to another. We actually find that people that play a lot of action games are really, really good. They switch really fast, very swiftly, they pay a very small cost. Now, I'd like you to remember that result and put it in the context of another group of technology users, a group which is actually much revered by society, which are people that engage in multimedia tasking. What is multimedia tasking? It's a fact that most of us, most of our children, are engaged into listening to music at the same time as they're doing search on the web, at the same time as they're chatting on Facebook with their friends. Those people that identify as being high multimedia tasker are absolutely abysmal at multitasking. When we measure them in the lab, they're really bad.
I bet you're not believing this one bit, but don't worry, neither did they.
So you show them their data, you show them they're bad, and they're like, not possible. You know, they have this sort of gut feeling that really they're doing really, really good. That's another argument for why we need to step into the lab and really measure the impact of technology on the brain. By forcing you to play an action game, I can actually change your vision for the better. Whether you want to play that action game or not. Initially, subjects perform where they're expected to perform given their age. After 2 weeks of training on action video games, they actually perform better. The improvement is still there 5 months after having done the training. That's really, really important. Why? Because I told you we want to use these games for education or for rehabilitation. We need to have effects that are going to be long-lasting.
I'm telling you guys, if we can continue to harness video games as a medium for subtly educating and exercising our minds, I think eventually the stigma against them will go away. But more importantly, we'll also reap many benefits in general as a species, leading to a more skilled and advanced population than previously possible. Yes, I'm imagining a world of superhuman gamers. So let's take this time to not only celebrate gaming, but celebrate each other for being able to grow closer talking about this shared hobby. On which note, if you have a friend or family member that just doesn't understand you and could really benefit from seeing this video, please do send it their way. I think everyone should know that video games are educational. I'd love to thank my patrons on Patreon for funding the time and research needed to make videos like this. If you'd also like to help support my work, please consider joining with the link in front of you. Otherwise, stick around and watch more of my videos, also linked here. I've been Johto Jonny. Enjoy, everyone.